Kevin, I just want to see if you can hear me. It says that you're still connecting to audio. Can you respond? Hi, Robin. I'm just chiming in to let you know that we're probably going to get going here in about a few minutes. Just give people a little bit more time to join. Hi, Erin. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get going here in just a few minutes. We were just giving folks a little bit of time to join us. It's 6:05 now. I'm going to give it one more minute and then we're going to get started. It's a small group tonight, but I think that'll be fine. Okay, Grace, can you stop sharing your screen? We're going to go ahead and get going. It's 6 after 6. I want to honor everyone's time. So we have a small group tonight. I can't imagine what else could be going on in the community that people could be concerned about. So, but I do think that we want to keep moving forward. Just a simple acknowledgement that we do record these town halls because we share them via YouTube so people can catch up if they weren't able to join tonight. So I still think we can have a really good conversation. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists tonight for taking the time to join us again in the midst of a lot of other pressing priorities and concerns that are probably on people's not mind, but certainly want to give a shout out to Allison Sharkey and Brey Golding and Paul Bauknight for being with us tonight. That's all I'm really going to say. Thank you, Kevin, for the for the hand clap. Generally speaking, we will talk a little bit more about how we tee up a few questions to the panelists before we open it up for questions from those who've joined us tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Grace so she can introduce the panelists and then ask them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work. Thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Tabitha. Like Tabitha mentioned, we'll do Q&A later tonight, but you're always welcome to put a question in the chat and we'll add that to our queue for when we get to that section of the event. I'm just going to really quick give you a rundown of who we have on the call tonight joining us as panelists. But like I said, we like to let them speak for themselves and give you a better idea of their work. So I'll keep it brief. Like Tabitha mentioned, we have Paul Bauknight. He is the Project Implementation Director at the Minneapolis Parks Foundation. We have Allison Sharkey, who is the Executive Director at the Lake Street Council, and Brey Golding, who is a Senior City Planner with the City of Minneapolis. So with that, I'll turn it over to you first, Brey, and you can take about 5 minutes, give folks an idea of what brings you into the space today.
Sure, thank you. First, good evening to everybody. My name is Brey Golding. I am a planner in the Long Range Planning Division in CPED for the City of Minneapolis. I've been there for roughly 3 years now. A lot of the work I do is either large comprehensive plan like Minneapolis 2040. With that particular project, I was really involved in the housing, affordable housing and housing section and environmental systems. And so we do that, we do small area plans and we do strategic plans and grant reviews. Another project that I've been a part of since being at the city has been doing a lot of research for the newly adopted cultural district program. So talked to a lot of different states and cities who had that program and tried to craft how it could work for Minneapolis based off of the state laws that we had here. And the biggest project I would say that I'm currently involved with, we're wrapping up, February will make 2 years of working on this project, is the 38th Street Thrive Strategic Development Plan, which looks at how the 38th Street corridor will grow and develop over the next 10 years from Nicollet to Bloomington. And so I probably will try to put some information in the chat regarding that because we're open for comments on that particular plan. And so just going into how this is involved with equitable development and my role in that, as a planner, a big part of what I do is going out to communities and trying to glean from them what are their needs, what are the priorities, what are the values of the community. And when it comes to equitable development, is packaging that in some type of document or helping them create some type of organization that can help them help the community influence developments in a collaborative process. Now, obviously, you want this to happen at the very beginning of the process because most of the major decisions happen at the very beginning, but you want these developments, everybody to be able to at least participate or benefit from the outcome of these developments. So as a planner, I try to help craft either policies and programs in-house or also influence developments, whether it's public or private projects, to be more equitable.
Thanks so much, Bree. We're going to pass it over to Allison. Allison, will you introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Hi there, I'm Allison Sharkey, and I am the Executive Director of the Lake Street Council, and I've been in that role for about 7 years. Before that, I spent a few years as a union organizer and spent some time doing political and policy work here and overseas. And so I can tell you a little bit about the Lake Street Council and what we have been up to recently around the redevelopment of Lake Street. So we're a business association. So we support particularly small locally owned businesses from one end of Lake Street to the other. We do that through business advising, through marketing support of the corridor, as we play a role as liaison between the small business community and City Hall as an advocate for our small businesses. So over the last 4 or 5 months, our work has really changed dramatically. We've grown a lot. The first thing we did after the first night of the uprising, after the first night when property damage happened on Lake Street, we threw up the We Love Lake Street Fund. And we thought, you know, we're a small organization, but we're connected to a few people. Maybe we'll make a few dollars that can support businesses. And it just took off in a way that I have never experienced before. None of us had. And we raised almost $12 million. And so we have been able to, so the first thing we did was we put together a coalition of all the South Minneapolis based small business support organizations. And we developed some values around what was most important to us, especially including preservation of our small businesses that were already there, preservation of affordable commercial space, and retention of property ownership and local control. And then the next thing we did was provide around $5 million in grants to 325 businesses that had sustained damage. Over 80% BIPOC owned, over 80% renters, and mostly very small businesses. And so currently, and we also paired that with construction support. So a lot of advising for businesses on how, on kind of what were their next steps to make repairs. Our next rounds coming up are going to be around providing funds to keep property in local hands and to ensure good design. We'll probably talk more about that later. And Paul is up next.
Thanks, Bree. Sorry, Allison. My brain is tracking a lot of things. Thank you, Allison. Paul, it's all you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Paul Bauknight, the Project Implementation Director at the Minneapolis Parks Foundation, which is a separate 501c3 that's partnered with the Park Board. I'm an architect by training and have had a diverse career and doing lots of work inside community, including running my own practice, managing the African American Men Project for Hennepin County twice. I liked it so much. And working on a lot of affordable housing projects. I was the director of real estate at Urban Homeworks. So I've done a lot of work around the connection between the built environment and community, and I'm really interested in where the synthesis is for culture, the built environment, economics. How does all of that come together and what does that look like? In my current role at the Parks Foundation, I'm in charge of projects that we support, like our project 26th Avenue Overlook in North Minneapolis, which is one of the first touch points where people in North Minneapolis can get close to the river, which is going to be finishing up, hopefully, because I'm in the last 10%. We all know how that goes, but hopefully later in November. Also our work down on the Central Riverfront with Waterworks and also Upper Harbor. In those roles, I'm the liaison really between the foundation and the park board and other public and private entities, but also I'm really focusing on how parks are part of our total urban ecosystem and how they're not these isolated, shiny things, and that they really are connecting all of the systems, and also where culture as a design process plays a role as we're looking at Black Lives Matter. What does it mean to tell all the stories in our community in landscape? So that's the work that I'm doing now, along with, I teach some classes at the U in design, and I'm on the design council there, and I'm on about 3 different boards. So that's what I'm up to. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourself. I'm just going to keep us rolling and drop the first question into the chat. And then definitely, because it's a small group, I think that we, Grace, don't necessarily have to select people's other thoughts as they have them. You can either come off mute or type it in the chat directly. But the first one is, how do you believe the community can currently influence development projects happening in their neighborhoods? And I will just qualify, when I say community, I mean community in the broadest sense. So community-based organizations, alongside residents, alongside elected leaders. How do we get this to work where those that are not the developer can actually effectively influence development projects? So I'm going to pick on Allison first, then we'll pop over to Brey, and then we'll end with Paul because he had just finished speaking.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about what we are inventing as we're going along. So none of us have ever done something like this before, right? This rebuilding of blocks. But a couple things I think we're doing quite well. And we have come together in a coalition that includes PPNA, the Lake Street Council, and a number of other organizations like Latino Economic Development Center, Seward Redesign, Neighborhood Development Center, and several other organizations. CPED is at the table as well. And so what I mentioned before, a couple of our priorities around preservation of affordable space, preservation of our community businesses, and prevention of gentrification and large scale shift in property ownership to people who live outside the community. So really, the community is needed in order to preserve any of those priorities. If left to the free market, really likely, what would happen is in a lot of cases, property owners would feel unable to redevelop their properties and would look to sell. And then whoever got there first with the biggest pocketbook would be able to get a hold of the land. And that's because a lot of our property owners are actually small entrepreneurs. It may be the only property that they own. And this isn't the case for everyone, right? So, we've got Target, we've got Wellington that owns a lot of property, but actually a lot of property owners whose places were destroyed are folks in the community that maybe own one building. And everyone initially said, when asked if you want to rebuild, everybody said, yes, I want to stay here. I want to reinvest. I want to rebuild and bring my tenants back exactly like what we had before. Now, 4 or 5 months later, people have started to run the numbers. And they know that their insurance is covering about a quarter of what it would cost to rebuild and about a quarter of what their losses were. They're getting bids from construction companies, and they're just seeing that it's not necessarily feasible without subsidy to rebuild what was there before, at least not without really jacking up the rent. And so, so there's a real need for community intervention. So a coalition came together and developed a series of, a set of values. And Tabitha and Grace, along with others, did a lot of work in developing this set of values, which includes first, say his name. So to not forget the murder of Mr. George Floyd. Second, recovery and renewal. So operating from a place of strength, ownership, health, and wholeness. So more than just replacing what was there, we need a recovery that enables BIPOC communities to operate from a place of strength and ownership. Third, measurable progress that is with, for, and determined by BIPOC persons. Fourth, wellness is key, meaning our community needs to be made whole. And fifth, centering BIPOC voices, including investing. So BIPOC leaders, BIPOC organizations need to be centered and invested in. So based out of these values, we've developed a set of tools that I can run through really quick. So, and basically the two big tools that we've been utilizing so far are technical assistance, so advising to businesses, and money. So far, I mentioned the grants that we had distributed that were really focused on preservation of businesses whose spaces were impacted. So over half were able to reopen. A number of them are still working on it. And there are two other ways that I mentioned coming up of how we plan to invest funds as a way of helping preserve the community members that are currently in spaces and owning those spaces. So one is funding for pre-development. And so probably the most important piece here to think about is, so if you're gonna build a building, it's really helpful to have a good architect who is of the community. We have seen one property that is already scheduled to be rebuilt. It's not in Powderhorn, it's down closer to Kmart. And the community was not fast enough in getting involved in what was gonna happen with this building. And the city has used all of its tools that the Planning Commission has to try to guide this project. But unfortunately, the owner mostly seems concerned about being able to make a profit as quickly as possible, and chose an architect from out of town, from a small town. And the result is an ugly building that is completely disconnected from the community and the community's desires. So we know from that it's important for us to operate as quickly as possible, and also to provide good advice, provide connections to good local designers and other local professionals, and also provide financial support so that people can invest in things like architecture and in feasibility studies so that they can make good decisions. The other way that we want to use, that we're going to be using some of our funds, is for acquisition capital. So when an entrepreneur goes to buy a property, one of their biggest challenges is usually not having enough equity for the project. So the bank will often always require that somebody comes to the table with a certain percentage of cash, which could be 20% or 30% of the cost to purchase. Most of us don't have that much cash laying around, and so we're going to be bringing some of that cash to the table. So those are some of the ways that our community really, as represented by community organizations, are seeking to intervene in the redevelopment process.
Great, thank you, Allison. Brey, can you share a little bit from your perspective how you would answer that question?
Yes, I would say from city point of view, especially in community planning and economic development, going off of what Allison said, just some more practical stuff for the community to do. One, really to educate yourself on development and how it works. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a master's in real estate, you know, but just have a level of understanding of how development works. So you know when in the project you need to be influencing decisions, because that's very important. And a lot of the time, most of the decisions have already been made by time the city is reviewing stuff. They've already conducted their feasibility. They've already done their design. They've done their due diligence. They own the land. And so by time they come to the city, they're ready to pull permits and try to build. So it's really, I would say, one, learning about development a little bit, and then also just being informed as to the movement and the activity of development that's happening in your area. And so I know that planners and project coordinators and CPED can help with that, because we see these things on a regular basis. So if there's a project that you heard about and you want to know more about it, you can contact folks at the city and get information to see, okay, how far along in the process are there? Because there are times where a developer will just contact the city and just throw ideas at us just to see if the project they want to do can be done based off of a zoning or a land use situation. And so, and that's public information. It may not be written down, but it's information. And so just really just inquiring and asking, you know, city staff, hey, have you heard about this? There's a rumor that such and such is trying to build on this particular street. Can you know, give us more information about it? And we can if we have it. Another thing is to be extremely vocal. I feel like in the recent months, the community is really seeing the power of their voice. And it gets me excited that if you are consistent and persistent, you can get city leadership to hear you and have a meeting and discuss the things that you want done. It's even better if you have an actual plan. So the great thing about having, whether it's a strategic plan or small area plan, if that is officially adopted by the city, then the things in that plan that the city is responsible for, you can hold them responsible for it and keep reminding them, hey, you said you're gonna do this in this capital improvement program or project, and you said you were gonna allocate this amount of money to it. So it's another way of accountability, and it's on the record, it's on the books. So I would say that's a couple of things. And another, if you can, is if you can find out who the developer is, especially early enough in the process, try to partner with them. Because for the most part, developers do want to do what the community, they want to provide a product that the community wants, especially if it happens to be like retail or anything where the community will actively be using this space. But a lot of times have no idea because they're not in the community. So if you can partner or at least connect with those developers and say, hey, this is really what we're thinking of, and kind of sway them on how this will benefit them, because everybody is looking for their bottom line, right? that's another way of doing it.
Thanks, Brey. Can I just do quick follow-up questions? So you said about the when the developers reach out just to throw an idea past the city, but are you saying that the city keeps like a record of all is that considered a technical, the pre-application phase? Or is that just even before the pre-application phase?
It's before the pre-application phase.
Okay.
Yeah, that happens a lot more often than people think.
Okay, but then in the pre-application phase, can we as the community request all pre-application work? So before they submit all their application materials in advance, like by neighborhood, would that be available?
I believe it can be done by neighborhood, but there wouldn't be a lot of information because of course they didn't submit everything, but you have a kind of overview of what they're thinking of doing. You know, on this particular address, they want a certain amount of housing units and they're thinking about affordable, and it may be, I don't know, maybe a 50-50 split between market and affordability. So you'll get something of that nature and who they want to partner with and who their architect would be and stuff of that nature.
And then just the other quick follow-up, you had talked about if communities had a strategic plan or a small area plan, would or does the city allow communities to go through their own strategic plan or small area plan process that then is adopted by the city or requested to be adopted by the city, or do those plans and processes have to adhere to the city's process guidelines and staffing?
I would say, well, anybody can do a plan. Any community can do a plan on their own. If it has no city involvement, it can be acknowledged and recognized, but it probably won't be adopted because there has to be something in the plan itself that the city is directed to do.
Okay, thank you. So Paul, can you give a little insight into that question? I'm just going to repeat it just for the recording as well. So how do you believe the community can currently influence development projects happening in their neighborhood?
So I think there's been a lot of good information already from Allison and Brey, but a couple of things I want to expound on. I think doing your homework is really important. So understanding what's going on in your neighborhood, around your neighborhood, and what's happening is really important. And I think that's for community members and for organizations to always be on top of sort of what the trends are, what's happening, because developers are always watching. And as Brey said, they'll just call up the city and go, hey, we have a thought about this spot. At the same time, I think it's really important to acknowledge and to always demand that, okay, the community knows best, and to not just accept that because somebody shows up with, you know, more real estate knowledge than you have, or et cetera, that the community doesn't know, you know, inherently what they really need in their community. I agree with Brey to be vocal, to demand more in communities that have been historically redlined and disinvested, to make sure that what happens in your community is just as good as what happens in all the other communities. I think that's really important, particularly right now. Also, you know, we dipped a little bit into this whole power dynamic, you know, private ownership, who's the architect, what's the community want, all of those things that are working, and how do you blunt that, and you know who gets to decide and how difficult that is. And I think that's where being vocal and also being connected to all the processes that are going on and who decides what. So you know who your local planner is, because you know all neighborhoods have a, Brey could tell you, you know who's the planner on the north side, who's the planner here. I mean, who is that? You know, what's your city council person thinking about? You know, all of those pieces are all going together because, you know, a lot of times, you know, all these relationships are happening at once. I encourage, you know, communities I work in, and I'm not right now like doing a lot of buildings, but I have, is, you know, to really be part of the process. And then for people who, like us, who are part of the professional side, to be patient, to work at the speed of trust, to, you know, make sure that people are really understanding and engaged, and to be willing to spend that extra time in order to get something that benefits everybody.
Thanks, Paul. So the last question that I have, and before we just open it up, I just dropped into the chat. So what ideas or solutions do you have to give community more influence over development that happens? So totally appreciate some of that, what you just, each of you just shared in terms of what you would call maybe your current best case recommendations. But if you had to think about one or two things, ideas or solutions to give community more influence over development, we would love to hear them. So Paul, this time I'm going to start with you, then we'll buzz back over to Brey and then end with Allison.
So I think the a key is that the driver needs to be community. Oftentimes the driver is not community. And I think when a lot of times when the driver is not community, that's when you run into a lot of the problems. Now, that's not to say that sometimes, you know, a good development idea can come from the outside, but there is a propensity for when that happens, and it's really hard. And like I talked to a lot of people, particularly designers, like check your ego at the door. So when you're going into community meeting, like, okay, it's not about you, and it's not about you already had it figured out. And you know, for all of us who've been trained in design or whatever, that could be hard, but I think it's really important. So community being the driver, having more agency and ability to shape what happens, and to partner, and for professionals and the other people to be supporting what community wants to do and empowering them to get that done. And then working through all of those challenges and being comfortable with the tensions that are always present to do the project.
Great, awesome. What do you think, Brey?
I would say a couple of things. The first thing is, and I know this might sound far-fetched, but I always encourage the community to become developers. I mean, why not? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be building a $5 million project. It may be you're rehabbing a house on your street. It can be something that small so that you can learn what development is and what it takes to have that type of ownership in your own community. I've seen that done in many different neighborhoods throughout the country where the community just came together. For example, I'm thinking of a German village in Columbus, Ohio. Community just came together because the city was going to come in and do something dumb, because we tend to do that at times. And the community came together, they pulled their money together, and they bought one building, and they rehabbed it, and then they sold it, and then they bought another building and another house in their neighborhood until pretty much I think they got like 60% of their neighborhood rehabbed, and they turned it over. And so again, the community really has more power and more knowledge and more ability than you may realize, is whether you believe you can do it or not. So that's one. Another thing would be creating some type of organizational structure. And I know Tabitha has heard me say this 1,000 times, of creating like a community development corporation. So some type of structure, kind of like, you know, the Lake Street Council, in which there is a entity that understands development and can help advocate on behalf of the community when it comes to developments that are happening. Like personally, I know Allison does a wonderful job with tracking data of everything that's happening with economic development and just regular development along Lake Street. So to have an entity that is doing that, so you can stay ahead of the game and prepare yourself and be strategic as to what your next move would be, is a big deal. So yeah, I would say definitely creating some type of structure that can advocate on the community's behalf when it comes to development matters.
Great, thanks, Bree. What are your thoughts, Allison?
Those are really fantastic suggestions. I think I would just, I would add to that and just note that, you know, one of the tools that can be used is along the lines of a real estate cooperative. And there is a lot of discussion right now over in the Hamlin Midway neighborhood, where some people are getting together to create a mechanism for individuals to invest. You may have heard about the Northeast Investment Cooperative, where there was a building purchased just in the same way that Brianna was talking about. But that isn't really being discussed in this long. A real policy, and I think that the time is, you know, really ripe for that. And so that would be an initiative that that residents could really think about implementing. So that's all that I would add to that. You know, and the other one is just call your council member, you know, get to know your council members and the council members of neighboring wards. And they really respond to the squeaky wheel. And so especially, you know, if you get wind of a development and you don't like what you see, let them know. If you also have, you know, if there are also values that are important to you and your neighbors, you know, for example, ensuring that that every development that's built includes units of affordable housing. You know, that was an ordinance that was passed because people in neighborhoods were concerned and vocalized that. So, you know, just keep talking to Alondra Cano in this neighborhood and some of the neighboring council members too.
Awesome. Well, thank you each for responding to those questions. We have about 15 minutes left. And so what I would ask us to do is, as if those are on who are participating, if you have questions, drop them in the chat or come off mute and just ask away. If the panelists can be mindful maybe to respond in about 30 seconds or a minute, just to see if we can get as many of your perspectives on that particular question as possible, that would be awesome. And so we'll just let you guys take it away. And certainly we have a few other questions that we can ask if others don't have any thoughts that come to mind, at least at this moment. But please, if you have things that you have been thinking about in terms of community development, especially as it relates to and Allison, I'm just going to pick on you a little bit. If you can just give some context to the degree of need along at least the Lake Street corridor. We know that, and Bree, if you want to chime in about what, and I don't know if numbers were ever put to the 38th Street Thrive, some of the ideas around and developing that cultural district. But just specifically, Allison, in terms of the number of properties that were impacted by the civil uprising and some of the cost or the numbers that at different points that we talked to state legislators about needing in order to really make a dent into the recovery for small business owners.
Yeah, so there were at least 400 businesses that received damage and around 30 properties that were fully demolished. The estimate is at about $500 million worth of damage. And I can't remember now if that was along the Lake Street corridor or if that's citywide, but it doesn't include St. Paul. But that number, the number that it would actually cost to rebuild is different, right? Because you're not going to be able to just rebuild exactly what was there. If you're going to take the time to rebuild, it makes sense to do it more densely, and that's going to mean more cost. So probably about $1 billion, and you know, raising 11 million isn't bad, but it's you know, and in some ways it's a drop in the bucket, which is why we have to be really targeted with it and why we're really focusing on leveraging additional sources of funds. But it's really tough when there's nothing coming from the federal government and nothing coming from the state government. You know, really everything that's been invested so far has been raised at a grassroots level, which is really phenomenal, but also really disappointing. And so, you know, our partners are working primarily with philanthropy right now to raise additional funds, but we've still got a long ways to go.
Mm-hmm. Brey, did you have any numbers to share related to thoughts around the development opportunity or needs along 38th Street in terms of them being quantified?
Yeah, so just to give a little background, in the strategic plan for 38th Street, it's a variety of different things. Everything is not just capital, but there is street improvements that is expected to happen along the street in the next couple of years. They're probably going to start the design planning process for that pretty soon, and that's transportation planning. There's also a lot of ideas as far as like programs, housing programs, a capital fund, doing a lot of celebratory projects like street signs and stuff of that nature. So if you total everything together, including physical development of buildings, you're looking around 150 million if you put everything together.
Got it.
Which is a big number, but if you break it down based off of each of the projects, they become a lot more manageable. So, and you never know what you'll get if you don't ask. So put that out there.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So maybe another question that I have is in terms of, so each of you called out some of the things that the community can do in terms of to be heard, to be vocal, to educate themselves, to be really aware of what's happening, to look at development trends, to try to be connected to community-based organizations who are trying to operate at an organizational level to drive change. And so one of the things that I hear as a community partner is that that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work for organizations, that's community-based organizations, that's a lot of work for residents. There's a lot that's often being asked of residents for any one issue. And clearly, as being in an urban environment and in the beautiful, diverse tapestry that Powderhorn exists, there's any number of issues that require the equal amount of attention. So I guess one of my questions, additional questions, is really related to if the community is going to really try to mobilize behind one thing, because it feels as if there's not all the things that we can do for each issue. Where do you think that, in terms of how would we be best served to try to use that energy toward driving the change that we're talking about tonight?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, yes, Robin, go right ahead.
Since there was such a long pause, I mean, and Tabitha, you got to know that I am just so extraordinarily frustrated, and I'm just going to try to just hold my tongue, but you got to start somewhere. And I mean, to me, it's like, pick something. And with the develop, you know, when I think about in terms of circle of influence and just living in Powderhorn, which is, you know, the area I'm interested in, but then, you know, I kind of look on Lake Street and it's like, I don't really see where all of this is really impacted, you know, Powderhorn's little piece of Lake Street that much. But, you know, I was walking, for example, by an empty lot on 15th between 31st and 32nd. And, you know, why couldn't we pick that and develop that empty lot? And you know, I know in other parts, like up in Northeast, they are looking at the cooperative, Kevin Reich had an idea about combining, you know, the co-op ownership with the land trust stuff and seeing what could come together out of that. I mean, I think you just have to pick something and get started and allow the community to participate. I'm so frustrated about, I think it's your little group called Reach. I mean, and it has, you called it a coalition, and there's, but I don't see where the partnership to include the community happens. It just seems like this coalition is limited to the members that are those, I don't see it filtering out into including the broader community. And so I think you have to allow that to happen. Powderhorn Park needs a land use committee. It needs to happen. Okay, that's, I just have to stop talking about it.
Thanks,
But,
Robin. So Allison or Paul or Bree, did you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, and I'm going to give an answer that a lot of times people don't like, but I think you have to do this really hard work about systems change and power building in order to really get the things that you want. And that's really hard work, and it takes time, and it's never as sexy as making a building, but it's critical to getting to where you want to go, because a lot of the things we've talked about tonight are all connected to the systems that operate in order to do this work. And so those are critical. And as Allison said, you know, getting to know your council member, Bree talked about, you know, developers, all of that. But I think this, at the end of the day, you know, how do you shift the conditions that are holding the problem in place is still a critical piece of the work that has to be done. That's really important, along with, yes, you know, not being paralyzed and finding a project that you're like, yeah, we should go do. But that's still really important work.
Why don't I go to Kevin and give Allison and Bree a little bit of additional time to think about if you wanted to chime in to respond to that. Kevin, your hand was raised.
Yeah, and I was just kind of thinking out loud, if memory serves me, the development with Hennepin County and sort of in that space along Lake Street was sort of there was a sort of partnership of people who came together to help with defining that space. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to, you know, when we do have groups of people that come together to help, you know, foster development with the developer, and, you know, might be groups of citizens, might not be just citizens, but can you talk a little bit more about those groups and what kinds of features they have? I don't think they're always just land use committees, right? So I'm just wondering if you know a little bit more about what kinds of groups of individuals come together to help affect some of the developments that occur.
Just to clarify, Kevin, are you talking about from a city point of view or a community point of view, or both?
Well, I guess it might be just maybe if you've been involved with some of the planning that's happened, and when you've seen groups of citizens that have, you know, interacted with it, is it usually just individuals who've been working with their city councilor, or are there sometimes groups of people, you know? I'm just wondering about the types of interactions that you've noticed, and that sort of features of the groups of people, or how that, you know, because it seems like a lot of those groups are generally just groups of engaged citizens who come together and you know, try to mobilize together, but I don't know much about that, you know, so I guess just looking to learn a little bit more.
Okay, yeah. I would say it's definitely a combination. And it's mostly when it is a group of people that come together, because they make more noise and have a greater impact. So I'm gonna take Upper Harbor, for example. There was a group of citizens, actually there were several groups, different groups across the board. Some from the Northside community, some were environmentalists, some that were just concerned with that particular parcel of land, that gathered together collectively and was like, hey, we want to be a part of this, and we felt left out of the process. And so they applied a lot of pressure to the city, contacting their council person, and he decided to create something called a CAC. And I'm forgetting what a CAC actually the acronym stands for.
Community Advisory Council.
Actually, it's he created the CPC.
CPC.
Collaborative Planning Committee.
Got it. The CAC is what I guess the park board uses.
The CAC is the park board, yep.
Yeah. But some type of community advisory group from that pressure. So that pressure caused that to be created. And so within that group now, you have the city at the table, you have the developer at the table, you have the community at the table discussing how to move forward with this project. And there's a lot more, I would say, accountability where this project goes than before. So that's one way, I guess, from a city point of view of how it can go. I think it's best when this advisory group happens way before anybody gets picked or anything of that nature, you know. That way everything is out on the table and nothing seems like, you know, it happened underneath the table and behind the scenes. But each project, unfortunately, is totally different. So.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd say my experience is there's a lot of different ways that groups come together. Sometimes it's what Brey just described, and it comes together because community is looking at a project and seeing, okay, we're left out or whatever, and they pressure and something comes out of that. Sometimes it's happens, you know, on the ground organically and it rises up and you know, that creates, sometimes it's through our recognized neighborhood, you know, organizations like Powderhorn that we have across the city. Sometimes it's a combination of, you know, it may be business owners. So there's a lot of different ways, and I think it depends too, and it also depends on what's the intent of the group. You know, what do they really want? And I think that gets to how they're formed and how much power they have in all of those things. And as Brey said, you know, it's better for that to happen way early in the process. And I think intent is really important because a lot of times the process starts and then groups are put together in order to support the direction that somebody already wants to go, as opposed to, you know, a direction growing out of the process. And I think that's really important, that, you know, you're not just trying to say, yeah, we agree, but, you know, there is room to have those deep discussions. So it can go a lot of different ways, but in all of them, you know, building trust, listening really deeply, allowing people to express themselves and being able to see that the project evolves, because as we all know, Brey and Allison know, like, projects evolve, you know, they don't end up exactly the same way they started. So that evolutionary process is really important. People feel like they see themselves in that, and their lived experience gets expressed in that process, and, you know, you get a better outcome.
Well, great. I mean, that took us up to 7 o'clock. Again, like I said before, I know that it's a small group tonight, but clearly there's other things still percolating up in community with the presidential election still not necessarily being resolved. So we definitely, again, appreciate each of you taking time tonight to come share some of your thoughts about community-centered development. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brey. Thank you, Allison, for spending time with us this evening. There doesn't seem to be any additional questions in the chat, but I certainly believe that if there others wanted to get additional insight from you, that we could pass along those questions, and hopefully you have a moment to respond to anything that comes up after this call. But with that, it's 7 o'clock. I'm pretty sure everyone else has other things to do this evening, but thank you for taking the time, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.